Why do we have a government and rules? Why can't we all be trusted to do whatever we like? Why don't we just chop the head off of the person in charge if we don't like their rules? These are some of the questions we're going to explore in this video. Here's an example of people chopping off the head of the person in charge. This was during the English Civil War. People who didn't like the king chopped his head off. There was a war, and, well, the king lost. There's King Charles I's head, there's the rest of his body, and there's the axe that did the deed. So we're going to explore these questions. And somebody who did a lot of deep thinking about these questions. We might take it for granted. Well, of course, there's a government. They make the rules. We have to follow them. But why? Where did this come from? Thomas Hobbes was a English thinker born in England, London, England, in 1588. He saw the beheading of Charles I, King of England, during the English Civil War. And during this war, he also witnessed lots of atrocities. What are atrocities? Well, here's a depiction of atrocities that happened during the English Civil War. It's the inhumane treatment of people on other people treating each other terribly. Here's an example. You can see this woman begging for mercy, and these English men killing her children. That's an atrocity. Hobbes was deeply troubled by the English Civil War, and he studied different forms of government. And he asked himself, why do people let themselves be ruled at all? And what's the best form of government to ensure people thrive as much as possible, or at least to prevent people from treating each other atrociously? Atrocities. He wrote a book that captured a lot of his thinking on this. It's called The Leviathan. And here are some of the central ideas. His claim is that before government, long ago, or even today, if there is some place where there is no government, people live in a state of nature. And he describes living in this world without government as a life that is nasty, brutish, and short. What's a brute? What does it mean, brutish? Well, here's a picture of a cartoon of a brute, just to give you an idea. People killing each other, at each other's throats, stealing from each other, raping, pillaging, just doing whatever they want. That's what he thinks life would be like if people don't have somebody or some government making rules. So, according to Hobbes, people enter into a social contract, an agreement, where they say, okay, we'll give up some of our freedoms so that we can't do whatever we want to allow a government to make the rules that we all have to follow to protect each other, protect ourselves from each other. Part of this social contract is the idea of the consent of the governed, that we are agreeing, we are giving our consent to be governed by this government. Whether the government is a monarchy, a king, or whether the government is an emperor or even a democracy with a president or a state governor, any of these governments, we're giving our permission for them to rule over us. Also, central to Hobbes is the idea now that people in a society have given this consent to be governed, they are not allowed ever to try to take back that consent and agreement. This is a critical idea. He witnessed during the English Civil War what happened when people said, we don't like that king anymore. We all have our side and our supporters. We're going to try to overthrow the king. Like I said, people treated each other terribly. There were many atrocities. So he felt that the idea that people were allowed to change their government by overthrowing it was not an acceptable idea. Most of the governments, nearly all the governments in the world at that time, were absolute monarchies, which means all the power is in a single ruler. A monarch can be an emperor, a king, a queen. In some countries, that person is called a czar or a shah, but it's essentially the one person who has the right to make all the rules, an absolute monarchy. Now, you might think, oh, wait, this guy Hobbes supported monarchies? You might think, Well, that's a terrible idea. We have democracy now. It's a much more peaceful way of us choosing leaders, and we don't kill each other all the time. But remember, he didn't have an example back then of a democracy that worked. So he was just coming up with the best ideas he could with what he had seen function in societies and in countries around him. Monarchies, absolute monarchies, in which people just said, oh, I don't like these rules, but okay, we have our monarch, so that way we're not all killing each other. Okay, these are the ideas for this video. I'll see you in the classroom.